Hey, welcome back to the Field and of Faith podcast. I'm Chris, and with me as always,
what's up? Luke is here.
Hey, and we're going to kind of dive into a new series, actually, for a little bit. Luke was telling me he was doing some research on like what men are interested in or what they're searching on the internet. And he goes, hey, let's do this whole series on practical theology. And I said, that sounds like a good one. And the first one we're going to talk about is probably an issue that is talked about more than most issues in Scripture, and that is money. What to do with our money, how to do with our money, and everything in between.
Yeah, and it's something that some churches talk about a lot. You see a lot of that from some of the prosperity preachers that, you know, the more you give, the more you get, and that's what they preach on nonstop, which is not necessarily biblical. And then you have some churches where they actually shy away from it because they're afraid to talk about it to their congregation because they don't want to scare people away. But it is something that is truthful and biblical. A lot of people say, you know, we don't have to follow the covenant anymore, and they talk about it from the original covenant. But it's like, well, no, it's actually talked about in Genesis, so it's before even any covenants were made. So tithing is highly important because giving is part of the structure of being a Christ follower.
Yeah. Well, I think just being someone who loves God. I wouldn't even say that because I'm a part of a Jewish community as well here in Phoenix, and they are very adamant about giving. Like they do a huge thing. We just did a bike-a-thon, and they have this whole idea that they give money out to other people for education, for this, for that. And so like they literally do the old school, like pass the hat around type of stuff when people are going off to college and trying to pay for books and doing this and doing that. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to see, you know, culturally what people are doing with their money, because this is a God issue, yes, but at the exact same time, I think it's a world issue. And I think it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. I think what we do with our money has intrinsic value and also a spiritual component to it. And so, yes, we go back into the Old Testament, we do find that there is several references about what we're supposed to be giving of our money. We call it a tithe, which is 10%. And my church is one of those. We don't even mention it in service. I've been going there for 6 months, and it is a blip on the screen as far as giving goes. I don't know what's going on at Oasis.
They actually do bring it up. What's really cool is in like the weekly pamphlets that we get for church service and stuff, that, you know, they talk about what the actually monthly budget is. They actually talk about what's coming in and what's going out. They're pretty open about the finances. You know, they don't talk about it a ton of like, hey, we need money for this, but they do fundraisers from time to time to make people aware of the needs, because their missions is super heavy of how much they actually give for missions, which is incredible to see that. But they're just open and transparent about it, which I love, because it's like, okay, you know exactly like where the church is hurting financially. And you also know like, oh, this is how much we're giving and putting out to the community. Like, okay, things are actually happening, and you know there's going to be a return on investment, like when you actually give into this mission. So.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the times, you know, with any type of donation type environment, it's always, you know, you're waiting on the Lord, you're waiting on other people, you're constantly networking. You've been through that the last several months. And we certainly know that the activities inside of a church building do not happen without the faithful giving of people. And churches have actually had to go like pretty creative with it. You know, I know over the years, even Oasis over the past few years, they've had schools inside of their churches. They've had to facilitate their buildings with other sort of community financial means, just to kind of offset, because a lot of people do not tithe. Working for a church for as long as I have, and getting to see some of the financials on like a Sunday morning to see how much comes in, it's like the $2, the $3, the $4, you know, people are putting what's in their wallet. Now, I have no judgment on, is that the poor woman, you know, we see in the New Testament where
2 pennies.
Yeah, she gives everything. Or is that somebody who's making $100,000 a year, but just was like, oh, I felt like when the offering plate was coming around, I had to give something. And so they just pulled out whatever was in their wallet.
$20.
Yeah. Like kind of like go through it and stuff like that. So, but we've done some things at our past church at the shelter with finances, with practical money. We've been fortunate enough to have some people who are financial planners, very good lawyers that came in and like taught on biblical money principles, and I've implemented a bunch of those, and it has actually made life more simple. It's kind of crazy, right? You follow biblical principles and your life becomes more simple because it's money isn't a physical, it's really spiritual. And when people like mistake those two, it gets really complicated, but we'll go into that a little bit later. But I think it's an interesting thing. The money is like, oh, you got to buy things. But for me, it's spiritual.
Well, I think there's something that's been lost, right? Like generationally lost of having to like physically earn your food and all that stuff, like to keep for it. And now it's this piece of paper that has some sort of value, which in theory really actually has zero value. So we've lost that transition of like, what does money actually mean to us? Because it's not like, oh, we would go to a job and we sit at a desk and we pound on a computer and it's like, here's a stack of paper. This is your life. Now go buy stuff with it. And we've kind of lost that. And I love it because it's, I garden quite a bit. So this idea of tithing, which maybe I'll just jump into it now, is kind of giving me a new perspective even with gardening, is you put a single seed into the ground. That seed, if you take care of it and you water it and you prepare it, will in turn could produce 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 seeds depending on how much you actually take out of it.
Hey, that's biblical. That's the parable of the sower right there.
It's really weird, right? Like you put a seed in the ground, if you tend to it, and if you put it in the right place.
Good soil.
Good soil.
Parable of the sower again.
It's going to produce a good crop, right? But then you can also take from it. And I think that's kind of like part of the church idea of, right, you're getting fed on a weekly basis. You're also, giving him back. But what's really cool and something that I learned traveling around Mexico for my job and being in the spirits industry is, tequila and mezcal production, they learned something from hundreds of years of production is, okay, you'd have your crop and you'd have your harvest and you would take 90% of your crop to harvest to go sell to market. And then you would leave 10% of your field to replenish that field and also give you an additional like small percentage for the next year because you're expecting growth.
Yeah.
Year after year growth. But from something of like, you're talking about these little old guys that don't have computers that know how to just grow plants, leave 10%. This is what they tell everybody. They leave 10%, right? These are guys that don't read the Bible. They don't have this understanding of a biblical principle. They leave 10% because they know that will yield 100% of the crop they need for next year, plus some.
Yeah.
And that produces everything they need year after year. But they have to leave and give that 10%, which I thought was amazing.
And what I think is probably more that you probably aren't really touching on, but I know it's there. They will actually also leave the best of the 10%, because the best of the 10% is what produces a great crop for the next time around. That's an interesting.
That is, because those plants, right, they know how to thrive and survive in that climate in that area. So yeah, therefore they're going to make stronger plants for the following.
Yeah, you would never take the weak ones and save that 10%, because then they're going to yield a bad harvest. Exactly.
And fewer crops and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Exactly. And then of course that comes back to it, like, right. So the biblical principle is 10%, right? And so I know a lot of us that do tithe, it becomes not necessarily religious, but yes, religious. All right, so this is how much I make. So this month I made $4,500. So I've got to give $450. And, okay, so I write my check, I do all that things, and then I kind of walk away from it. And I've done that for a long period of time, especially when I was a teacher, and every single month, I knew exactly what I was getting paid, so I knew exactly what my tithe was. And at the end of the month, I could do the reoccurring paycheck wonderful thing and, hit repeat. This is what it's going to come out of my bank account every single month. That was this. But I didn't allow the money that I gave to become a spiritual part of my giving. Just as when I worship or when I pray or when I, fast, those are giving of myself to God in my love and adoration, but my money never was. But when I switched it and I said, okay, God, it's not going to be a flat 10% anymore. And this was like an interesting conversation because in the New Testament, there is no like figure number. And this goes into our class. It was give unto my heart where it needs to be directed and speak to me and let my wallet be a reflection of the heart of Christ. And so the more it became a spiritual connection for me, it became like, oh, where am I giving my money to? And it never became a figure. When God said, hey, I want you to give this person money, and I'm not going to, I can use a personal story, but I won't tell you how much. And then the amount was, I did okay, I'll argue with you for a little bit of time. But it became an interesting, like, hey, what do you love? And what was really interesting about that is it was a large number. And then when I gave it, and I was just like, God, this is a gift. This is what you told me to do. This is how it is. Like the next week, God goes, hey, I got 2 more clients for you for video and podcast editing. And it was $1,400 that was coming in. And I was just like, oh, thank you, Yeshiva. And it was just one thing after the next that I learned to trust in God's faithfulness because he is the ultimate giver of things. And I started to see my wallet as a reflection of my heart. And if I'm not willing to give of my heart to somebody, I store it in, which is what we tend to do. And the same thing is a reflection of money. And that's practical theology, I think, for me.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. So I actually don't even handle our finances at home. Danielle does.
Oh, I know.
So
because I've asked you about, hey, how's your budget? How do you
I don't
let
know.
this happen? And you have no idea.
She shows me once a month and we go over it, but I don't pay attention to it. So for me,
scary.
It is scary because she likes graphic tees.
No, but it has nothing to do with that.
No, I know where our money's going. I know exactly too, right?
Okay.
So looking at our tithe, right? Even when, I didn't have a job, even when we were still tithing and stuff, which is really hard to actually give up money when you don't have money coming in. But one of the things that's kind of nice, and it's been working really well for me, is last year before all the job stuff happened, that was one of the last pieces that I had not fully given to God was my finances.
Yeah.
Because money's a big deal for me because, I came from not a lot and I've had to work for everything I have. And
now you're making it.
And we've been super blessed. So yeah, now I'm making decent money and it's, but it's still hard to give of that. And of course, when I started to give of that, things started to fall off and I was getting tested a lot. But with somebody else running the finances in our home, I don't really necessarily get to see the tithe go out necessarily, right? There's not that heart connection, right? We talk about the quantity and how much is going out and it's like, okay, that's a lot of money, but it has to happen, right? Yeah. But my heart's not fully connected with it because it's not me physically writing the check or clicking, yes, donate monthly, that kind of stuff. So one of the things that's been really cool for me is when we first started some of the fundraising stuff last year with Field and Faith, we started having some money come in and it was like the first time money was coming in, it's like, oh, hey, this person's donating $25. This is great. Like things are coming. And then we had hit our numbers that we're supposed to hit for the qualifying for this grant program we were part of. And I remember driving and we had gotten just enough to get across the finish line, so to speak, on this first round of it, which wasn't a lot of money to raise. It was $2,500. And I remember driving and getting an email from the people saying, hey, there's a couple people struggling to hit their numbers, and I was just like, okay, God, I see what you're doing. You're putting this on my heart that I need to donate.
Yeah.
It's okay, well, how much, God? $500. Oh, well, we've only raised this much money. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to donate $500 today. Donate $500. And it was a hard thing because it was like, man, I have to do this because God's calling me this number specifically, which I was like, this is a lot of money to me right now, here and now. And to be able to give that and to know that that money was going to a group of people that were doing something really good that we could also be a part of and sow into. And it was amazing the conversation I got to have with the people afterwards that run the organization to be able to help them out. But then to in turn watch it a couple months later of that money doubled on our side. We gave that check for $500 and it's like, oh, well, here's $5,000 from you from other organizations. It's like, okay, I gave $500. Now here's $5,000.
Yeah.
Just because I followed my heart and I actually gave where my heart was calling me to give and where the Lord was put on me. And it was, that's the stories you don't see a lot or hear a lot or even notice a lot, but it's just a perspective shift and you have to see it and you have to give from your heart in order to see those things happen.
And it's terrifying, because we are living in a world where we look in left and right and we're watching inflation kind of go through, in the last 4 years, we've had this conversation, I don't know how many times, where we just looked around and we said to ourselves, wow, things not just have gone up a little bit, they've gone up double, they've gone up 70, 80%. I mean, there's so many aspects of life where we're looking at young people and we're going, how are they going to make it? How are they going to get into a position of financial success, especially in American style world where the purchasing power is literally at your fingertips with like Amazon and everything that you want. And then there's the convenience factor. And when it comes to money, I always say it's a reflection of your heart. I don't do, personally for me, DoorDash. I don't do any of the convenience purchases because I'm not a convenient person. And if I'm going to spend $5 on delivery, I'm going to mentally go, that's my money. I'm going to save that and go pick it up myself if I'm going to go out and buy food, right? And even grocery shopping, I always mentally go into it and say, hey, this is lunch for 2 days. It's $7. Oh, it's only $3.50 a lunch. But I had to do that is from somebody who my family has money. And then when I was making my own, I didn't make money. And so I went from, go eat whenever you want, mom and dad, go get dinner, go get lunch, go get this, go get that. And then when I was on my own financially and making a teacher's salary and making $2,300 a month, it was peanut butter jelly sandwich time every day for lunch. Because I think for a lot of people where they struggle is it's not about what they make, it's about what they spend. And the spending aspect of society has been like, oh, you have to show people like it's okay to go out. I went to a bachelor party and I told everyone, I go, listen, if we go out and the food on the menu is this, I won't eat. And they're like, why? I was like, it's not in my budget. I was like, I'm here to hang out. I'm here to have a good time, but I can't afford that. And they were like, oh, okay. And I was just like, it's nothing. But my finances, like I have not been able to pay off my credit card once in my entire life because I will never, my mom's a financial person. She's like, you never spend more than what you make. And if you have a terrible week or a terrible month or whatever it is that you're doing, you just find a way to get by. And when I've lost jobs, it's amazing how much food is actually in your cupboard. That's one thing I've learned.
Which is one of my favorite things to do. Like when we have leftover night, I like to go, all right, we're going to have a pantry battle. I'm going to find items in the pantry. And I'm going to figure out how to make a meal out of what's in the pantry. Because it's a fun thing to do. Because it gets you like in the kitchen trying to figure out, all right, I have this, this, and this. But at the same time, it's like those things are going to get expired within 5 years.
Yeah.
And really, they've probably already been sitting in it for 3 years and you forgot about them. So you got to use them. But there's actually a saying that I heard, I think actually this morning. Somebody was talking about like, do you need a nice car? Do you need a nice house? It's like, okay, well, think about this. You just bought that thing. Could you buy it again right now? Do you have the money to be able to afford to buy that a second time? Is it really worth it? And it's just like, well, yeah, like, do you really need that new pair of shoes? I know you really want them, but do you need them?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool to look nice and all that kind of stuff, but is it functional? Like, where else could that money go? Is it going to go to food for next week? If you're always struggling, it's like, there's a reason why you're always struggling financially. It's because your money's not in the right place.
Yeah. Well, there was that clip from the show Yellowstone. I figure it was like 1923 or something like that series. And it was somebody who was selling like washing machines and like the modern things with technology. And the guy just has the complaints like, oh, how much is it? And gives them the price. And he goes, oh, but then I have to spend money on the electricity. And then I have to spend money on this. And then I have to spend money on that. And what you don't realize is the consumer a lot of the times becomes a slave to the industry. And for me, that also becomes a weird god in a sense. And I'll put it this way, like, right, you want a new car, right? My wife and I, we are shopping for a new car and we are just struggling because of the interest rates, because everything like that. We've had 4 years of no car payments, and that does wonders for your budget. Not having a car payment is glorious, where you're just paying car insurance and, it's $600 something for each car every 6 months. You're like, wow, this is feasible. I can do this. And then when you're looking at cars and you're looking at what's the monthly payment going to be, you start breaking it down and going, okay, that's this many hours of work. I'm going to have to do this. Have to do that. And it's almost like, wow, I have to be handcuffed to something that maybe I don't want to do for something that I want. And a lot of the times is we don't realize it because it's like, oh, I need a car. Okay, you need something that runs. You don't need the car. You need a car.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of young men, you know, there's the, oh, I'm dating. People are going to look and judge me for this or that. Dude, the perfect example of all of that is Kirk Cousins. The dude drove a minivan. He's got a bunch of kids, but he drove a minivan and would sleep in it, and he was making millions of dollars. And he's just like, what's a car? You know, he's got the money, but it wasn't where his heart and where his value was.
Isn't that weird too, that he's a believer? Man, that's just really weird how that goes hand in hand.
He's a strong person, but again, it's a reflection of one's heart. And, you know, you don't find value in that. You find value in like what you can provide. He's playing a sport. He's getting paid millions of dollars, but at the exact same time, he's influencing the world by speaking his faith in a very practical manner. Practical theology.
Yeah. And if a woman wants you for what you have and not who you are, she is obviously not the right one. Because if you have just a beat up truck and some jeans and what, dude, if that is looked at of like, oh, I don't like this guy because he's not attractive, like run away, because you're going to be in for a lifetime of heartache, and hurt and whatever else, because her heart's not in the right place, so therefore she's not going to be in the right place, and she's not the woman for you. I mean, it's just plain and simple as that.
Yep. And I think it goes back. I learned this a long time ago. Here's something practical for you. It's called the art of removal. You know, if you take a look at your life and if you want to make something beautiful out of it, sometimes it's about removing some things from it to basically bring out the undertones of what it is. And this was all done as like a visual art show. And they took a big old bar of soap and they just started carving it. Like it was a huge block. And then they started carving it. And it's just like the art of removing something can reveal more of its beauty. And it's like, we use like the story of like Michelangelo. It's like, you know, you get this giant marble slab. The marble slab isn't beautiful, but it's the artist's ability to remove pieces from it and expose beauty in it. And there's a lot of things in your life that you think like, oh, I need to have this. Well, remove it from your life and see what comes out of it. Oh, your kids are spending 4 hours on screens? Well, remove 4 hours of screen time and see what can come out of it. Remove this, remove that, and remove the things that you are reliant on that is like the modern stuff. Remove going out to dinner and cook. Learn a new skill. There's a lot of things that can come out of it.
There's also just a lot of time that comes out of it, right? Because time is money. At the end of the day, like my life is super scheduled out now and it kind of sucks sometimes, but like I have to sit down and have intentional time. So like cooking food for yourself, how much time goes into that? How much money goes into that? Well, actually, if you cook for yourself, you're going to save a bunch, because I can cook a meal for a family of 5 for $20 or less now. Not only that, we're going to get a meal and a half out of it. So you break that down, like, dude, we're eating for like $30 a person, really on average. Not only that, now I'm spending time with my kids, so they're not using electronics, because electronics cost money and all the apps and all the subscriptions and whatever else. And now I'm investing financially and in time to my children and my wife and having conversations. It's like, man, where your heart is, that's where everything else will be. It's like you have to think about those things of where you're going, where is your time going, because your time is money at the end of the day. You know, it's either a earthly currency or it's a heavenly currency. So
yeah, and again, it's spiritual. Like it comes down to it. And when you're unwilling to give of something, whatever it is, for the benefit of the kingdom of heaven, that's where Christ is going. What do you love more? And that's like those weird things that like terrify me, because I want it to be, I love God more than this, but my wallet shows me that I love this more than God because of how my money is being spent and where my money is going towards.
Yeah, I think one of my new sayings is, well, it's stealing from an old saying, but catch a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day, but teach a man how to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime. But teach him how to fish, like you feed him for a lifetime of a lifestyle, right? Because now he's investing his life and time into that. It's like, man, if you teach somebody how to give properly, or how to feed into a ministry, or how to teach him how to serve, you feed him for a lifetime.
Oh, totally.
Because it's so important, because now that's where your heart is, that's where your money is going to go, that's where your time's going to go, that's where your investments are, right? You have to invest on your future, your eternity, because that's where everybody else needs it, man. If we just spent, like, statistically, 5% of the church tithes, which is a terrifying number if you actually think about it. The fact that churches are barely operating, nonprofits are barely operating. Like I see the finances on my own end all the time. It's like, I get why nonprofits only last a year and then they shut down. Like, we're a year and a half. Sweet. We're kicking butt. We're ahead of the curve. But it's like, man, if people actually did what they were supposed to and actually fed into the world, man, could you imagine what this world would actually look like? Mm-hmm. Like, kids wouldn't be hungry. Families would be intact. There wouldn't be divorces. Like, people would be changing the world if they gave of what they had, right? Which could be time, talent, treasure, is what we always say. Give of your time, give of your talent, give of your treasure. There's a reason you have the job you have of making a ton of money, because God's trying to give you the opportunity to give of what you're giving and getting. Or he's trying to give you, you have a job that you can make a ton of money in a short amount of time. Well, hey, you have the time to give. So you have to give, because it is a principle of, right, refreshing others and watering others, because you're going to get water in return, man. It's a principle that is so important and so practical. And if you're not doing it, your life is kind of probably a little funky and a little off all the time, because you're not getting watered in return. You're not getting that prosperity back. You're not seeing the principles in action in your own life if you're not doing the first part.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like, what you just said there just got me thinking about, like, Jewish communities and these even Muslim communities, what I see what they do with their finances. Like, in Islam, they're not allowed to take out loans that charge interest. I don't know if you do that.
Yeah, I actually just saw that, because that's how they're buying houses in America now, and it's kind of a crazy thing.
What?
The government is bypassing interest for, if you're Islam in the United States, so you can buy a house without interest.
I got it. I feel like that's a baloney thing.
I don't know. It seems feasible, man, for religious purposes, but
yeah. But I mean, like, the whole idea of it is, a lot of the times what you would end up seeing is, when you go into these Muslim countries, is you would see these half-built homes, because they were only building their homes when they had the money to buy the product, and so their houses were being built brick by brick. And some of the times it would be like a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. But it was just, the families were all like, hey, we're going to build this person's house. And as a family, they were all chipping in to buy the construction and the materials and everything like that to kind of build up the home, because they weren't allowed to take a loan. But, like, when you moved in, you owned the home outright.
Yeah, and that's the principle that we don't pay attention to in the West, right? We call it the United States as the West. Like, going to Mexico and stuff, you see the same thing, half-built houses. You also see houses that have all the structure for the top, right? They're one story, but they also have stuff so they can go to a second story when they're ready. But it's because they're constantly giving to one another and within their own families and within their own communities. Like, they're so community focused.
Yeah.
Because the grandparents live with you forever. And that's why there's that second story. It's because the grandparents get that first story, the family gets the first story. And then when you're ready to have your own house, you build the second story and then you live upstairs. That's where you're supposed, like, the family and community aspect, right? That's what the church is as a whole. It's like, it's not necessarily the 4-square walled situation. It's the community that you are, and that's where you're supposed to be giving of your time, your money, and your talents.
Yeah. And then, for me, it's in the Jewish community that I'm part of, they're very adamant about they're not allowed to give loans to other part of their members of the Jewish community. So if you give somebody money, you are not allowed to charge interest. You're not allowed to, like, do anything. So it's a matter of, like, hey, if I'm going to give you a loan for a vehicle, or I'm going to give you a loan for this, they're within their community, they are building wealth in very biblical ways. It's Old Testament, but at the exact same time, what if Christian communities, like, got together and were like, hey, this is what we're going to do? But again, it comes down to the individual. I think, like, the Jewish community, no one's leaving the Jewish community. It is like, they're not getting out of it. But with, like, Christian communities, I think there's so much freedom and there's so much grace. They're like, well, if I didn't want to pay the loan, I wouldn't have to. God told me I didn't, whereas, like, in a Jewish community where, like, they all know each other, they're all in the same, like, type of situation, they're very strict and, sound on a lot of those other things, where it's like, I don't think Christian communities would be able to do that with one another without somebody trying to take advantage. And that's the thing I think that kind of like breaks my heart, because these other communities are doing it and they're benefiting like crazy from it. But if we could just do that, I think in a Christian tour, it's like, hey, I'm not trying to make any money, but I'll loan you $4,000 for this car, but this is your payments. This is what you're going to have to pay me back on it. And then it's just like, well, I don't have this, I don't have that. Because we see it all the time with like rent and, this and that. So,
well, it's like credit cards nowadays, man. It's like 20% interest. Like people don't pay attention. You get a credit card, it's like, oh yeah, it's no percent interest for the first year. Then you put a ton of money on it of stuff that you don't need because you don't have that money. And then you will never pay that credit card off unless you win the lottery. And we are like, look at divorce rates. Like,
I was divorced over this.
The number one thing for divorce rates is finances. Why? Because everybody has a credit card and we're buying stuff that we don't need instead of investing it in the right places. I mean, we have a credit card and we had to put a bunch of money on it for like when I wasn't working, and then we had a bunch of house stuff and surgeries and all kinds of stuff fall into our lap at one time. So like they're great to have as a backup plan if you absolutely need it. But now, hey, here we are 6 months later, like paying it off, and we're almost done paying it off because we're trying to be good stewards of our money, and it's like, it's doable. But it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of giving into the right places.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it goes into like relationships and stuff like that too. And it starts in the home. It really does. So, I mean, if you got kids, like you got to teach your kids how to use money. Like that's the one thing my mom did so well on. Like my mom ran all the finances. I'm pretty sure my dad's in the same boat that you are. He just never knew, like, I just put money into the bank account. Your mom took care of it,
It's the best. Yeah.
And I can't do that. I'm hands-on. I got to know what comes in. Yeah. But it comes into seeing like what's value. Like, is my kid going to get something just because they get it? Or is there not necessarily like, oh, do you have to earn it? But I want them to also always understand like, hey, there's a cost to owning something. It's going to cost you time or money. Whatever it is that you're going to purchase in your life, I feel like it's going to cost you those two things. And you have to kind of weigh those on like, is it a value? Like if my kid's like, oh, I want a baseball or a softball glove because we don't know the gender yet. And it'll be, well, I think that's a great value because now it's like, how many more hours are they going to spend outside? Is that going to be a way for me to connect with them? Because they're going to need somebody to throw the ball with. That's a value. That's something I can invest in, and then there's other things to where it's like, oh, can I get this video game? I don't play video games. I'm not going to invest in, So there's a lot of give and takes, I think, a lot of the times when it comes to it. But I think it's the idea of where's my heart? Where's my value? And then truly understand like it's spiritual, because it's either going to be spent and take away from other things that God has intended for you, or it's going to enrich and value. And, I always say, if God tells you, you should probably listen. He's got reason for what he's asking for.
Amen. So I want to turn the tables a little bit and actually take this concept into some other area.
Okay.
Specifically with trust. So obviously I meet with a lot of people, talk to a lot of people, and you can kind of see, especially with men, and I see it a lot, with just, we typically have walls up. And it took me a long time just to be able to share who I am and, some of the hard stuff. And, like met with some pastors this week and talked to them, and just like, there was no walls and no barriers. And like, we were just all free sharing where we're at and and it was so cool to see that. But like just walking up to a normal guy and actually sharing who you are other than what you do, which is the worst thing to ever do. But to be able to share your heart with somebody is so difficult for us as men. So let me put this into like a perspective. And this is a godly perspective too, of a way of giving to God, right? A lot of us look at our relationships like, man, my relationships aren't deep enough. They're not this, they're not that. Maybe your relationship with God isn't far enough that you want to go. Well, how much are you giving to that? Like, just think about this for a second. Like, if you met a guy and you gave him 10% of your heart, like actually invested and said, okay, I'm going to give them like 10% of my story, 10% of my weakness, 10%. How much in return is he going to get? Like I was sitting with the young guy this week and just talking to him, and if you ever just sit and talk to a guy and look him in the eyes, especially if they don't know you, they're not going to look at you in the eyes. And to see the kind of the wandering going because it was uncomfortable, and then for me to start sharing like 10% of who I am and what I'm doing and like where my heart's at, the eyes stopped shifting as much and starting to see more of the connection happening, right? And then he started giving me more.
Yeah.
Right? So it's, to me, it's even more than a financial thing. It's like, what else could you give this to? Like, same with God. If you just gave God a little bit more, how much more are you going to get in return? Like if you put 20% more time and effort and loving and reading into the word and what God wants for your life, how much more are you going to get in return?
Yeah. Well, and then I'll take it on this because this is practical theology. So this happened to me when I was 16 years old. I don't know if you remember my first car. It had like the 6-disc CD changer, the 12-inch. Yeah. But the CD changer broke.
It was under the seat too, wasn't it? No.
It was in like the back or something. Like it was in the back, and I had to. Oh man, those are the good old days.
You put CDs in it. Nobody even knows what CDs are anymore.
Exactly. But you only had 6 to choose from. But it broke, and I didn't have any sound. Like the frame plate on it broke, and I didn't have any money to fix it because it wasn't something like I could go to my parents because they were like, "This is your car. This is your responsibility. You pay for gas. You pay for this. We'll pay for the other things on it," right? And so I didn't have the money for it, and I didn't have music. And this was like before like iPods and everything like that. So it was normally something that I filled my time with just listening mindlessly to this. And then I just said, hey, I'm going to fill this time with prayer. And every time I got into the car, no matter where I drove, it was just me talking to God. And it became this like weird thing. When I had the money to fix my radio, I was like, is this how I want to spend my money? Because I started to enjoy it. It was those quiet times because, I say it's solitude. I mean, most people end up picking their nose, because I think nobody's watching. It's that quiet moments. But I learned to fill the gaps of my life with a relationship with Christ and the Holy Spirit. And it was one, I don't know if it was so long ago. I'm sure I probably got it fixed. But even afterwards, it was like, I would just turn it off, pray. Just, oh, hey, there you are. How you doing, God? Just going through it. Try it. Turn off the radio. See how that does for 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah, you want more in life, you have to give more, right? It's just, it's theory, it's biblical, it's spiritual. Like, it's a hard principle sometimes, but man, if your heart's into it, like, just watch the things change in your life. It's the biggest game changer in your life. Just give a little bit. Like, let a little bit of yourself out one way or another, financially, spiritually, personally, man, because he is made strong in your weakness, right? If it's a weak area, like, he's going to get glory for it. So let it shine.
All right. Give me Luke Detraz money. We'll end it on this, instead of, hunting stories, because we could probably waste a lot of money on hunting and fishing and camping and everything else. But
so I started doing my own oil because it's super easy to do, which is, it saves me about 50% of the cost because I think oil change is like $110 now, which is ridiculous. And I drive a lot, so I need to change my oil even more frequently. So I've been doing that myself. But buying food, I always try to shop what's on sale. So typically we put together some sort of like grocery list for the week and a meal planning thing for the week of like, these are what our dinners are. So what I always do is I go on the Fry's app, look at their weekly ads, and then I actually will design my dinners around that. So, this meat's on sale this week. All right, well, this is going to be the meal. And then, I use this for Monday night, and then I can also use this for Thursday night. And so that's typically how I do my meal planning because, it saves a ton of money that way because you're not just going to the store, which I used to do, go to the store and go, all right, I'm just going to walk to the meat section and I'm going to grab 5 meats and then this is how I'm going to base my dinners. And it didn't matter what the cost was and I was just going to do it. So I started doing it that way just to save on money because it went from, the inflation cost of, I'm spending $150 to $200 on groceries to where I can get through the grocery store and get a couple meals worth of food for like $100. Yeah. So it's saved us quite a bit of money doing it that way.
Dude, and then that's just it. I like that one. I've never done that before. Probably because at our place, we don't get I never check my mail I have nothing that comes in the mail anymore.
Well, do it on your app.
Yeah, I guess.
They have their weekly ads on.
I just go to Costco.
Yeah, Costco's easy, cheap. But then too, like Costco's ingredients on a lot of stuff. I pay attention to ingredients and organic stuff and all that, so as much as I can.
Try and get some more to it.
But you can get a fully organic, healthy meal for a family of 5 for under $20.
Yeah, you can.
But you could go to Jimmy John's right now and get 2 sandwiches for $30, which is insane to me. So I love you, Jimmy John's. I'm sorry.
Okay. Anything else, or is that just like when you're saying like, hey, this is when I spend money, this is what I go to? Is there any like websites or anything that you use?
Not really. I pay attention to like some of our subscriptions of what's necessary, what's not, as far as, TV and all that kind of stuff. And clothing wise, I try to buy basic t-shirts, plain t-shirts instead of graphic tees, because, you can get a Carhartt shirt for, they're $19.99 now. They used to be $16.99. Or, some like classic order tees and some of that kind of stuff for $15 because I like how they fit. And then I just get Levi's all the time. You don't have to get designer stuff. And then I always shop Amazon for anytime I need shoes. 1, because they don't have my size in most stores.
Yeah.
But 2, you can see what's on sale, and then I base that based on what's on sale.
Yeah, and that was the thing that my mom always said is like, full price is never worth paying. You can always find a discount. My wife has slowly learned this aspect of my life, which is I'll always look it up. Doesn't matter where it is. She's like, oh, it's a great deal. It's 50% off. And then I'll go and look it up and like, oh, I can find it for this somewhere else. It's actually not as good a deal because a lot of the times they'll be misleading on what the original price is. They'll raise the original price and then do a discount. And sometimes those discounts, like people have exposed that all over social media. Like, oh, the discount's more than what it was a week ago. And so...
Yeah, I've worked in distribution forever, so I'd see it on, the beverage side quite a bit of what the actual prices are and what the markups are and all that kind of stuff. You got to shop around a little bit.
Yeah. And it comes down to it. I think it's a matter of thinking long-term rather than short-term, because it's all of those little things that end up coming to get you. It's going to cost you time, to fix your oil, to change this, to change that. Or you're going to go and take it into a mechanic, which they're charging like $100 an hour right now, which is crazy. So, yeah, you're going to do my oil here in a little bit.
Sure, that's fine. It's easy.
Field of faith.
I'll teach you how to do it.
Field of faith. Yeah, but my car's not as like tall as yours. I got to get like underneath it,
which is great because I'm claustrophobic, so I can just roll under there, man. I could dance around into that truck, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I probably won't have you do it because we have a buddy who does cars and recently, got let go from his job. So I was like, oh, here's a way to bless. I need some stuff done.
Weird.
And I know a good friend of mine is in need. So it's like, hey, what is the shop going to charge? And I'm more than happy to give a friend something. I've done that a lot of times.
Support your community.
Dude.
It's important.
If you got somebody who's got a skill, and that, dude, that's one thing. And this isn't a hack, but if you're asking something of somebody and they are providing you a value, give them what they're worth, especially your friends. Like when you ask for discounts from your friends for what they do, like that to me is like, oh, if they're offering you a discount because you're a friend, great. Don't ask for one. That's just me. It's just like, hey, that's somebody's livelihood. That's what they are. Like give people what they're worth. Show them that they're valuable in what they do.
Yeah, you want me to cook a meal for you? I'm happy to give you a discount, but don't ask for a discount.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's how you make it. And, I always say, dude, barter. I've gotten so many things like, hey, I'll do this. I'll make a video for you. I'll do this for you. Like, what do you want? Hey, I can build this for you. There's endless amounts of things to kind of save money and, barter. Man, that's an old method of exchange of goods that we just don't use anymore.
Well, not even that, but the other piece of that is biblical, right? The network with who you're in, like have people like, we're all part of one body. Some of us might be a hand, some of us might be a foot. Like, well, we're all part of one body and we got to utilize each other's resources.
Yeah. You cook dinner and
you buy the meat. Yeah.
I don't know how many kids like babysat. Like, I don't know how many times I've babysat for people in exchange for stuff when I was single. Hey, you do this for me, I'll babysit your kids 3 times. They're like, done. Thank you.
Worth its weight in gold. Yeah.
What time are you showing up?
Oh, you don't do overnights? That sucks.
Yeah. How long are you willing to take these?
6 months. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up there for today. Hopefully you got some good stuff out of this, and just kind of keep in mind that, it might be a little bit different for you, but be praying. Always be in the spirit on this. It is a tricky subject because we do understand that there's bills to be paid. God's not reckless when it comes to finances. He's not going to take from you that you cannot give.
Yeah.
And if he does, he's going to restore it. He always has. It could be a day, it could be a week, could be a month, could be a year, but he's always faithful in that regard. And that's the Old Testament. Like, God took some time to get to his people. They were in the desert for some time. There's long periods of time throughout it. Just because you're reading the story doesn't mean there wasn't 2-3 years before chapter 7 and chapter 8, So, but love you guys. We are a 501c3 here at Field and Faith. If you're looking to donate.
Yeah, if you want to see a return on your investment and see some men come out of this stronger and better and making disciples, we're always happy to receive. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments or anything, please reach out to us. If you have a subject that's just really bothering you that you want us to share and talk about, shoot us an email at info@fieldfaith.org. But until next time, thanks for listening.